They told him to sign up as a joke. That was the part no one wanted to admit later. Not the teachers, not the students, not even the ones who had encouraged him with fake smiles and sarcastic support. It had started in the cafeteria, as most rumors and cruelties often do, whispered across sticky tables and passed like wildfire between bites of pizza and soda. "You heard Marcus is gonna sing at the talent show?" One student chuckled. "Seriously, the blind kid?" Another laughed. "Yeah, man. Bet he thinks he's the next Ray Charles or something." They didn't say it to his face, not yet. No, they were too clever for that. They masked their mockery behind grins and phrases like, "You should totally perform. It'd be so cool." What they wanted was a moment, a video, a meme. Something they could record, upload, and laugh at for years to come. And Marcus? He knew exactly what they were doing. He wasn't stupid. He just wasn't angry either. Not in the way they expected. Marcus had been blind since he was 3 years old, the result of an illness so fast and severe that it snatched his sight before he had a chance to understand what he'd lost. He didn't remember colors. He didn't remember faces. But he remembered sound. He remembered the gentle way his mother's voice broke when she found out, the quiet sob she tried to hold in as she rocked him to sleep in their small, dimly lit apartment. Over the years, Marcus had learned to hear the world more clearly than most people could see it. The tension in someone's voice, the tremble behind their jokes, the hollow ring of forced laughter. It all told him more than a glance ever could. He walked the halls of Lincoln High School every day with his cane in one hand and his earbuds in the other, not because he wanted to block people out, but because he had to preserve a space for himself, one where their stares and assumptions couldn't reach him. Music was his shield, his guide, his world. And not just listening, either. Marcus had been singing since he was 10, in private, in secret, late at night when the city was quiet and his mom had drifted off to sleep. He would sit on the edge of his bed, feel the vibrations of the speaker through his mattress, and let his voice follow the rhythm. It wasn't just a hobby. It was how he stayed sane. How he stayed hold that so when someone finally did approach him. Directly Tyler Griggs, a popular senior with a loud mouth and an even louder laugh, it didn't surprise Marcus at all. "Hey man," Tyler said, his tone falsely friendly. "You should sign up for the show. I heard you can sing, right?" Marcus tilted his head slightly. He didn't need to see the smirk on Tyler's face to know it was there. He heard it in the lift of his words, the exaggerated pause before sing. But Marcus just smiled, cool and steady. "Okay," he replied. Tyler blinked, caught off guard. "Wait, seriously?" "Yeah," Marcus said again. "I'll do it." And just like that, the joke became real. Tyler didn't know what to say. He thought Marcus would squirm or mumble or walk away like other kids who'd been cornered by his antics. But Marcus didn't flinch. He stood tall, cane in hand, and walked off without another word. The rumor mill ignited within hours. By the end of the day, everyone knew. "Marcus is singing at the show. For real, no way, bro. This is gonna be hilarious." Group chats lit up with GIFs, memes, and jokes about blind people and autotune. A poll was even created anonymously. How long will he last before someone pulls the mic? But Marcus didn't back down. That night, he sat alone in his room, his old keyboard in front of him, fingers poised gently over the keys. The piano was secondhand, slightly out of tune, and missing a few chipped corners, but it was his. He had taught himself to play by ear, one painstaking note at a time, until he could recreate melodies most kids couldn't even recognize. He pressed one key, then another, building chords in the dark. His mother stood silently by the door, watching her son, the boy who had once clung to her skirt in terror, now radiating quiet confidence in a room full of shadows. "You sure you want to do this?" she asked. He didn't turn toward her, but he smiled. "Yeah," he said, "I'm sure." She didn't try to stop him, She just walked over, kissed his forehead, and whispered, "Sing with your heart, not your hurt." As the days passed, the hallway whispers turned into open mockery. People started asking Marcus what song he was going to sing, but not because they cared. They wanted ammunition, more fuel for their joke. Is it going to be Stevie Wonder? That'd be ironic. Maybe something by The Weeknd, since, blind, weekend ... whatever. Marcus ignored them. Every day he practiced. Every note he sang like it was the last thing he'd ever say. He wasn't preparing to prove them wrong. He was preparing to be heard for the first time, and maybe the only time. The list of performers was printed and taped to the auditorium doors a week before the show. Marcus was scheduled to go first. Tyler made sure of that. "Let's start the night with a bang," he joked to his friends, laughing so hard he nearly cried. Or a flop. They all thought it would be funny. A blind boy fumbling his way to the microphone, cracking his voice in front of hundreds. They had no idea what was coming. Marcus, meanwhile, stood by himself in the back of the auditorium the night before the show. The lights were dimmed. The stage was empty. He walked carefully up the steps and felt the grain of the floor under his shoes. He reached the mic stand and adjusted it by memory. He stood in silence, letting the emptiness speak. He imagined the room full of people, imagined the tension, the laughter, the waiting, and then he exhaled slowly. He didn't need to see the crowd to feel their presence. He didn't need to see their faces to reach their hearts. He was ready. Tomorrow everything would change. The auditorium buzzed with the electric energy of youth, the kind that floats just beneath the surface before a storm. At the front, Mr. Halberd shuffled his stack of papers, trying to maintain order as the student body fidgeted and whispered. Today was Open Talent Day at Lincoln High School, tradition meant to showcase hidden gifts. But everyone knew this wasn't just about talent. It was a social battleground. Marcus sat backstage, hands folded on his lap, fingers brushing the smooth curve of his white cane. He could hear the sounds, the squeak of sneakers on waxed floorboards, the slam of a locker echoing from down the hallway, the voices rising and falling like tides in an ocean he could not see. And he could hear the whispers sharp-edged, thinly, veiled like razors beneath silk. They're really gonna let the blind kid sing? Maybe he'll trip on the mic stand first. Nah, man, they just wanna laugh. He wasn't new to the cruelty of teenagers. Blind since birth, Marcus had become fluent in the language of tones, the mock concern, the forced politeness, the subtle jabs. But this was different. This time, they didn't want to ignore him. They wanted to watch him fall. And they wanted it to be public. The idea had started with a dare. Xavier Dupree, charismatic, popular, and dangerously bored, had nudged Marcus. During lunch a week ago, "Yo, Marcus, they say you got pipes." "That true?" Marcus had nodded. Music was his world. Melody, vibration, resonance, those were his colors, his shapes, his stars. "You should sign up for Open Talent," Xavier said, too casually. "Give us something unforgettable." Marcus had hesitated. His grandmother had always told him, "When you sing, baby, the world listens. Not 'cause you blind, but 'cause you real." She was the one who raised him, who placed a broken old keyboard in front of him when he was 5, who taught him that broken keys still made sound and broken people could still be beautiful. He agreed to perform. Not because of Xavier, not to prove anything, but because when he sang, he felt whole. Now waiting behind the curtain, Marcus inhaled deeply. His palms were damp. The stage crew was whispering nervously, "He's next. Are we really doing this? I heard Xavier put this up on TikTok already. He's calling it the Blind Serenade. This is gonna go viral." Mr. Halberd approached him and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You ready, Marcus?" "I'm ready." The curtain lifted slowly, and Marcus stepped out, cane in hand. feeling the stage beneath his feet as if each wooden board whispered directions. The crowd hushed for a beat, just long enough to draw in expectation, then broke into scattered chuckles and snorts. Someone in the back coughed the word, "Stevie." A single spotlight snapped on. Marcus stood alone, framed in light, a silhouette of stillness. He walked toward the microphone, counted the steps like notes in a measure. When he found the stand, he folded his cane, tucked it under his arm, and gently touched the mic. He leaned in. Silence, real silence, and then he sang "It." Wasn't a song from the radio. Not a chart topper or a trending challenge. It was an old spiritual his grandmother used to hum when bills were overdue and the pantry was thin. A song called "Deep River." Soft at first, just a trickle of sound like a breeze through trees. Then rising warm, resonant, piercing. The auditorium changed. Laughter dried up like water on a stove. Phones lowered. Eyes widened. The richness of his tone curled around the rafters and dipped into the cracks between seats. It reached into places people forgot they had: sorrow, awe, longing. It wasn't just that he could sing, it was the truth. In it, the unshakable, trembling, glorious honesty. Xavier, seated in the front row, blinked hard. His grin faltered. This wasn't funny, this was humbling. Somewhere in the middle of the song, someone started to cry. Quietly, not out of pity but out of something else. The kind of crying you do when something pure cracks open inside you. By the final note, Marcus stood alone again. Not because the audience didn't know what to do, but because they couldn't. Applause didn't erupt right away. There was just stillness, reverence. And then thunder. A roar of claps, cheers, and voices rising as one. A standing ovation that shook the floor. Marcus bowed slightly. He didn't see their faces, but he didn't need to. He felt it. Respect, awe, humanity. He turned and walked offstage with the same quiet dignity he came with. But something had shifted. Xavier stood in the wings, trying to hide behind his phone, but it was still recording. And now the caption didn't make sense anymore. The blind serenade wasn't a joke. It was a reckoning. That night, the video went viral, not because Marcus failed, but because he reminded the world what beauty sounds like when it comes from someone who has seen only darkness. And in doing so, he made them see. The auditorium was silent for a heartbeat longer than it should have been. Then the first note left Marcus's lips. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was soft, almost a whisper, but pure and haunting in a way that stopped time. His voice trembled at first, like a new bird testing its wings, uncertain whether it was truly allowed to soar. But then it rose higher, stronger, and clearer. The tremble vanished. His tone sharpened into something rich and velvet-like, gliding over the acoustics of the room with ease. The microphone couldn't contain it. The sound bounced off the walls and into every heart in the room. You could hear the breath catch in the throats of the students who had laughed minutes before. Even the teachers leaned in closer, stunned into silence. Mr. Dalton, the music teacher, who had remained largely skeptical throughout rehearsals, was frozen near the back of the room. His clipboard slipped slightly from his hands, hanging limply by his side. The man had trained students for statewide competitions, coached kids who had gone on to become stage performers, and yet, this was raw. This was something different. Marcus, eyes still closed, stood rooted in the center of the stage, gripping the mic with both hands, unaware of the reactions swelling around him. He was somewhere else entirely, somewhere deeper, somewhere safer. The lyrics he sang weren't from the usual school-approved songbook. He'd chosen a hymn his grandmother used to hum when she thought he was asleep. A song of pain, a song of triumph, a song about walking blind and still finding the light. The room began to feel smaller, more intimate. The size of the auditorium no longer mattered because everyone, in that moment, was alone with Marcus's voice. It reached into corners long forgotten. Past the bravado of bullies, past the indifference of classmates, past the arrogance of faculty. It peeled back layers and got personal. Tears welled up in unexpected eyes. Even Tommy, the ringleader of the prank, stared at the stage, jaw slack, hands clenched awkwardly in his lap. It wasn't shame yet, not remorse, but it was something. By the second verse, Marcus's voice soared. He hit a note that seemed impossible and held it not with brute force, but with soul. The kind of note that breaks things, that demands attention, that opens hearts. Phones were forgotten, whispers had died, even the principal, Mr. Holmes, who rarely attended student performances, stood in the back hallway, eyes slightly glossy. When the song finally ended, Marcus stood still, breathing quietly into the microphone, his head bowed slightly forward, as though he too was returning from whatever place he had gone to while singing. There was no applause at first, only silence, thick, staggering, but then clapping, one pair of hands, then another, then an eruption. It wasn't polite clapping either. It was the kind of applause that starts in your chest, that aches in your palms, that tells you something just changed in the room and maybe inside you. The crowd rose to their feet, cheers, whistles, even stomping. Marcus, confused, turned slightly toward the sound. He hadn't expected this, not from this crowd, not from this school. He smiled small, unsure, but it reached his eyes. That was when Miss Jensen, the drama teacher, stepped forward and gently took his hand. "You have no idea what you've just done, do you?" Marcus tilted his head. "Was it okay?" She laughed, not out of amusement, but in disbelief. "It was beyond okay, Marcus. You just rewrote the rules." Someone from the front row called out, "Sing it again." And the audience echoed, voices rising in unison. "Encore! Encore!" Marcus backed up slightly. I didn't rehearse anything else." Miss Jensen leaned down and whispered something into his ear. Whatever she said made him nod, and just like that, he stepped up to the microphone once more. But this time it was different, because now Marcus knew they were listening, not laughing, not sneering, not mocking. Listening. And that made all the difference. For the next few days, Marcus's name echoed through the halls, not in mockery, but in awe. Teachers brought it up in class, students whispered about it over lunch trays, and faculty members exchanged knowing glances. But Marcus remained grounded. He still walked the same halls, still traced the same walls with his fingertips, still sat alone at lunch with his Braille book open beside him. But inside, something had shifted. He could feel it, not on his skin, but in the way the air moved around him, less heavy now, less cruel. Mrs. Lane, the school counselor, called him into her office. Her tone was unusually warm. "Marcus, we've had several local news stations reach out. They want to do a story. We're not pressuring you, but the world might need to hear your voice the way we did." Marcus hesitated. He wasn't sure if he was ready for more attention. His whole life had been about blending in, or rather, not being noticed. But he wasn't blind to the power of what had happened. The song that once lived in the quiet corners of his bedroom had suddenly opened hearts. If he could do that, if his voice could cross boundaries he couldn't see, maybe it was time. The interview took place in the school library. Bright lights, boom mics, a cameraman with a beanie and nervous energy. Marcus sat calmly with his hands folded in his lap. He told his story not for pity, but for understanding. How losing his sight didn't mean losing his perspective. How music had been his language when the world forgot to listen. When they played the clip of his school performance on air, it rippled far beyond their small town. Within a week, Marcus's story went viral. Clips were shared on YouTube. Headlines ran, "Blind teen leaves school speechless. From mockery to magic, the voice that shut down the bullies." Celebrities tweeted about him. A famous R&B singer even posted, "That kid's got soul, someone get him in a studio." But even as the world reacted, Marcus stayed Marcus. He still wore the same red hoodie, still turned his head slightly when someone entered a room, as if listening deeper than others heard. Fame hadn't changed him. If anything, it seemed to affirm something he always knew but had rarely been allowed to believe, that he mattered. Even if he couldn't see the ones who tried to ignore him. The school organized an assembly 2 weeks later. This time, Marcus was not the joke. He was the center of the stage. Invited, respected, honored. Principal Harmon stood before the crowd. Today, we celebrate not just a voice, but a moment of truth. When someone is pushed into a spotlight as a joke, and they rise to the occasion. With grace, that is not just talent, that is character. The applause rolled like thunder. Marcus stepped to the microphone. He didn't need notes. His voice, calm but firm, reached every corner of the auditorium. "I was never mad at the ones who laughed," he began. "I was sad that they couldn't see me. But the truth is, even if you're blind, you still want to be seen. We all do." The room stilled. Not from awkwardness but reverence, he continued. Music was never about showing off. It was about surviving, about saying something when I didn't have the right words. But now I have both music and voice. And if my song made you stop and think, then it did what it was meant to do. Then, without cue, he sang again. No background track, no microphone tricks. Just Marcus and the quiet courage of a boy who had learned to see with more than his eyes. His voice, rich and filled with layers of pain and power, soared once more. There wasn't a dry eye in the room, among the crowd. Even the boys who once mocked him sat still, hands folded, lips trembling. They didn't clap out of obligation. They stood up not out of peer pressure, but because something inside them had shifted. It was in that moment that Marcus's story stopped being about a blind boy who could sing. It became something more, a mirror for everyone watching. A reminder of what happens when we underestimate quiet strength. When we fail to see potential hiding behind difference. After the performance, Marcus walked off stage. His mother was waiting in the wings. Tears streaked down her face as she embraced him tightly. "You didn't just sing, baby," she whispered. "You showed them how to see," Marcus smiled. "Maybe now they finally do." The auditorium buzzed with nervous energy. It was the day of the school's spring talent showcase, and every seat in the room was taken. Parents, teachers, and students filled the space, chatting, laughing, and flipping through the program flyers. The stage curtains were drawn shut, hiding the flurry of activity behind them. But somewhere in that crowd, seated quietly in the front row, sat a woman with calm dignity in her eyes and tears already forming. It was Marcus's mother. She hadn't told him, but she took the entire day off just to be there. She wore her best dress, not out of vanity, but because she wanted to. Mark this day as special. She clutched a small handkerchief in her lap, nervous not for her son's voice. She'd heard that voice 100 times in the kitchen, in church, in moments of joy and heartbreak, but for the way the world would receive it. Would they hear what she heard? Would they feel what she felt? Backstage, Marcus stood still while Miss Julia gently adjusted the microphone for his height. His fingers nervously traced the lines of his cane, which leaned against a stool nearby. Mr. Riley, the music teacher, gave him a reassuring squeeze on the shoulder. "You ready, champ?" he asked, not expecting a loud reply, but Marcus smiled. A calm smile. "I was born ready," the stage manager gave a cue. The auditorium lights dimmed slowly, and a hush fell. The MC stepped forward and cleared his throat before speaking into the mic. "Ladies and gentlemen, our next performer is someone who's shown that music is not something you see, it's something you feel. Please welcome Marcus Langston." Applause, at first polite, then growing louder as some students recognized the name. There was curiosity, there was confusion, there were whispers. And somewhere in the back of the room, a few boys, yes, the same ones, snickered. The curtains drew back slowly, revealing a spotlight on a small, slender figure standing at the center of the stage. The bright lights bounced off Marcus's white shirt, casting him in a kind of halo. He couldn't see the sea of faces, but he felt the heat, the weight, the presence of hundreds of people. He reached toward the microphone, steadying himself. Silence. The pianist struck the first chord. A soft, aching melody, just piano and a breath of air. And then, Marcus began to sing. It wasn't loud at first. His voice crept in like dawn, soft, tentative, but glowing with something unmistakable. A note that stretched, reached, and resonated far beyond the walls of that auditorium. His tone carried a rawness that didn't ask for attention, it commanded it. Every note was painted with lived experience, the loneliness of isolation, the ache of not being seen, and the quiet dignity of someone who had learned to live with both. You could feel it in the back of your throat. Midway through the first verse, something happened that even Marcus couldn't have expected. The snickers stopped. The whispers died. Students leaned forward, mouths parted. Teachers clutched their programs. And one by one, phones were lowered and eyes were lifted. The boy they once mocked, the boy they ignored, was giving them something. Holy. By the time he hit the chorus, a swell of emotional power that cracked into the still air like a revelation. Some of the students were crying. Even the school principal, known for her tight lips and no-nonsense demeanor, found her vision blurred by tears. And backstage, Miss Julia covered her mouth, sobbing quietly. Marcus's voice didn't just sing, it told a story. And in that moment, every person listening became a character in it. They were no longer audience members. They were witnesses. By the time the last note floated into silence, Marcus stood still, the microphone still warm in his hand. No music, no movement, just a heartbeat's worth of quiet. And then the room erupted. It wasn't polite applause, it was thunder. A standing ovation that rattled the floorboards. People clapped, whistled, cheered. Some stood on chairs. His mother rose slowly, hands pressed to her chest, crying openly now. Backstage, Miss Julia ran out from the curtains, wrapping Marcus in an embrace as the curtains closed again. But the sound from the audience didn't stop, it kept going, long. After he'd left the stage, Marcus turned toward the direction of the noise and smiled. They heard me, he whispered. Yes, they had. And they would never forget it. The room stood suspended in time. Marcus stood still, the echo of the last note he sang still hovering in the air like a prayer that refused to die. For a full 5 seconds, nothing moved. No shuffling feet, no claps, no coughs. Only silence, silence that did not mock but honored. Then, one person in the back slowly stood and began to clap. It was Mr. Jenkins, the school's strictest teacher, known for rarely showing emotion. His eyes were misty. One clap turned into 2, then a thunderous wave of applause erupted from the gym, filling every corner with emotion. Teachers stood, some with their hands over their mouths, and students rose in waves, shouting, cheering, clapping so hard their palms burned. Marcus bowed gently, then turned toward the direction of the mic stand again, almost in disbelief. The voice that just left him didn't feel like it was his, it felt divine. He was still blind, still quiet, still mocked by many, but for the first time he was also seen. Not as the blind black boy, but as Marcus, the voice that made a school fall silent, cry, and then rise to its feet in thunderous awe. Backstage, students who had once bullied him now waited in line just to shake his hand or give him a hug. Those who had once laughed behind his back now asked him questions with genuine admiration. There was no trace of mockery left in their eyes, only awe and a quiet shame that they hadn't seen him sooner. As the crowd began to exit the gym, Principal Reynolds walked to the mic and said, "Today we didn't just witness talent, we witnessed transformation." Marcus, you reminded us all what it means to have a voice even when the world tries to silence you. The video of Marcus's performance hit social media within minutes. By the next day, it had gone viral. Comments from strangers around the world poured in. "I don't know this boy, but his voice healed something in me. This young man just restored my faith in humanity." News outlets picked up the story. Talent scouts began calling the school. A popular music producer reached out with a message. "We'd love to talk to Marcus. That voice doesn't belong to a school talent show, it belongs to the world." But the moment that mattered most came quietly, a few days later, when Marcus's mother sat on the porch with him. She held his hand, tears falling freely down her face. "You've always been a miracle to me, baby," she whispered. "But now the world knows it too." Marcus smiled and nodded slowly, his head tilted toward the sound of birds chirping in the trees. "I think I was born to sing, Mama," he said softly. She smiled. "You were born to be heard." And from that moment on, he was. Through every note, every stage, every challenge, Marcus carried with him not just a voice, but a story of courage, of grace, and of the power within a quiet boy who refused to stay in the shadows. His blindness didn't define him. His music did. And the world would never forget the day a blind black boy was told to sing as a joke, and instead sang the truth of his soul into the hearts of millions.